What's up guys, Michael Kamalo here, aka Dr. Gains, and in this video we are going to bust the mythbusters who say that you cannot work your inner chest. A long time ago I posted a video that I called the 10 Pec Commandments, where I went over the various motions you can use to preferentially target different regions of the chest. And I break it down into the clavicular head or upper chest, the sternal head or middle chest, and the costal head or lower chest, and then break each of those into inner versus outer. However, one of the most frequent comments I get on that video is that, hey, it's not possible to work the inner or the outer chest because it's all one muscle head and it gets activated as one unit. Really, it's not their fault for saying that, because there are a lot of professionals and influencers out there who are preaching such blasphemy. But what I'm here to do today is to lay this whole debate to rest once and for all, and in fact, the entire concept of regional hypertrophy, or the ability to specifically target different regions of the same muscle, so that there's no doubt in your mind that yes, you can work your inner chest. But first, as usual, I'm going to show you how to do it by demonstrating an exercise I developed that will allow you to preferentially target the inner pec muscles, allow you to fill out that region of your middle chest. Then we'll dive into what is called non-homogenous hypertrophy, which is this principle, and I will prove that you can work different regions of the same muscle. Then we'll apply that non-homogenous hypertrophy specifically to working pec major and describe why the exercise I'm about to show you is so great for working the inner pec muscles. And if later on you want to go back and review any section of this video, you can always use the key timestamps that I put in the video description to skip right to whatever it is that you're looking for. Let's get to it. This exercise can be done on any dual cable machine by standing a step behind the cables, so that when you put your hands in front of your chest, the adduction or squeezing motion. Then you'll alternate between using your chest to squeeze those handles together, and then while maintaining that contraction, you'll extend your arms out in front of you in a press motion, and then bring them back in and repeat. Note a couple of important points on the form. First, I do not extend my arms all the way out to the side or abduct my arms all the way out before beginning the squeeze back in. I'll explain why in much more detail later in the video, but for now, just know that it's because when you abduct your arms out all the way, it's the outer chest fibers that start to take on the majority of the force, and we want to maintain as much force and tension as possible on the inner chest. Second, notice that I keep my hand open throughout the exercise. That's because when you close your fingers and grip something, your brain is wired to activate your arm muscles, and we want to take the arms out of it as much as possible. So by maintaining an open palm, you increase your mind-body connection with your pec muscles. Try it out yourself. Try doing these with gripping with closed fingers, and then try doing it with an open palm, and you will notice that you have significantly greater ability to focus on using only the chest muscles to squeeze when you have an open palm. Even then, it helps to really try and focus on just using your chest, squeezing those pec muscles to bring those handles together, and then press them out, squeezing the entire time throughout that press as well. Then finish each set by repping out as many of the squeezes as you can until failure. And as my final form tip, if you're not making a face as ugly as that while you're doing these, then you're doing them wrong. And by the way, I call these the squeeze presses, but I feel like that's kind of lame. So if anyone out there can think of a cooler name for this exercise, let me know in the comments below and I will start using that. And for those of you who are saying that, well, you don't have access to a dual cable machine like what I use in this exercise, then right after I publish this video, I'm going to be posting a shortened version of it on TikTok, where I will give a dumbbell alternative as well as a body weight alternative in case you don't have access to cables or dumbbells, that will allow you to still work your inner chest with whatever equipment you have or don't have available. And you'll be able to find that on my newly created TikTok account at Michael_Kamalu. All right, now to understand how and why that exercise does work your inner chest, let's address the underlying principle here, which is non-homogeneous hypertrophy, like I mentioned previously, which is this whole concept of can you really target specific sections of the same muscle? Not talking different muscle heads here, different sections of the same head. This has been proven over and over in countless recent studies, and not just for pec major, but for skeletal muscles all across the body. For example, in a study done in 2011, researchers had participants do a specific type of tricep extension exercise, and then immediately after, they measured the muscle activation by using a technique called T2 weighted MRI, and they measured muscle activation in the proximal, middle, and distal triceps. And what they found was that with the exercise they had done, there was significantly higher activation in the proximal and middle sections of the tricep than in the distal. Then they had the participants continue to do this tricep exercise for over 12 weeks. And then after the 12 weeks were up, they measured the size of the muscles to gauge hypertrophy in the various sections, and just like they had suspected, due to the activation, there was significantly greater muscle growth or hypertrophy in the proximal and middle sections of the triceps than in the distal. And again, we're not talking different heads here. We're talking within the same tricep head. And in case you're thinking to yourself, well, what if that's just how the triceps grow? Right? What if no matter what you do, it's always the proximal end that grows more than the distal end? Well, the researchers did a follow-up study in 2013, and this time they had the participants do a different type of tricep extension exercise. And again, they measured activation immediately following the exercise and followed them up for 12 weeks afterwards. And this time, with the second tricep exercise, there was significantly greater activation and hypertrophy in the distal end of the triceps muscles than the proximal. So, which specific region of the muscle heads was targeted the most and underwent the most hypertrophy was dependent on what type of exercise the participants were doing. Another study done in 2015 analyzed region-specific hypertrophy or non-homogeneous hypertrophy in the quads. They had the participants randomly split into two different groups and had them do two different squat types. The first group did heavyweight squats, while the second did lighter weight jump squats. So exact same movement, really the exact same feet distance apart, exact same everything except for that one was using heavier weight while the other was doing it more explosively, faster movements. Then after 8 weeks of doing those exercises, the researchers measured the relative amount of muscle growth or hypertrophy in the proximal, middle, and distal sections of their quad muscles. And one of the things that they found was that with those who had done the heavy squats, it had resulted in significant hypertrophy in the distal and middle sections of the quad muscles, but not in the proximal sections. And on the other hand, those who had done the jump squats, they had significant hypertrophy in the proximal and middle sections of the quads, but not in the distal region. So what do we learn here? Well, not only does the type of exercise affect which specific part of a muscle is going to be worked the most, but how you're doing that exercise, and in this case, how explosive, how quickly you're doing that exercise. And this is due to something called elastic component force transmission, which is different in different regions of the same muscle. In another study done in just last year in 2020, researchers had participants split up and do two different leg exercises. One did leg extensions, the other did Smith machine squats. And then again, after 8 weeks, they measured the relative amount of hypertrophy in each section of the quads. And what they found was that those who did the leg extensions, they had significant hypertrophy in all three sections, in proximal, middle, and distal quads, in the rectus femoris and the vastus muscles. However, those who did the Smith machine squats, they only had significant hypertrophy in the middle section of the quads, not in the proximal and not in the distal. How incredibly specific is that for regional hypertrophy? Who would have known that you can target the middle of a muscle more than either end. I could go on and on here, but as my final example, another study done in 2014 had participants split into two groups, and both groups did the same exercise. They both did leg extensions. However, one group did them concentrically while the other did them eccentrically. Think of concentric as a normal leg extension where you're extending your leg up and pushing the weight, whereas eccentric is like a negative exercise where the weight is going down while you push against it. What they found at the end of the training period was that those who had done the exercise eccentrically had significantly greater levels of hypertrophy in the distal quads. And they took muscle biopsies to try and figure out why, and what they discovered was that those who had done eccentric training had 4 times more of a specific enzyme called focal adhesion kinase, which is an important enzyme for muscle growth. They had 4 times as much, but only in the distal region of the quads. Those levels were the same in the middle and proximal quads across all the quad muscles. And the conclusion was that the greater proliferation of this enzyme in the distal end for those who did the eccentric training was responsible for the greater amount of hypertrophy that they found. So not only does what exercise you do to work a muscle affect the region that is worked the most and how you're doing it and how quickly you're doing it, but whether you're doing it eccentrically versus concentrically can and will have an effect on the region of that muscle that is worked the most. And these effects of region-specific hypertrophy have been found in almost every single muscle across the body. Even the biceps, for example, it can be targeted so that you can work the proximal or upper biceps more than the distal or lower biceps. And if all of these other muscles can undergo region-specific hypertrophy, how much more pectoralis major, which is significantly more complex and varied in its origination points and movements, how much more will that be susceptible and affected by region-specific hypertrophy? So why do so many people say that it's not possible to target a specific section of a muscle? And most likely it's because a lot of them are using just EEGs in their studies to measure electrical activation and use that to determine what parts of a muscle are being used and being worked. But there's a lot more that goes into it than just electrical activity. Just because the regions of a muscle are all undergoing electrical activation does not mean that they're undergoing the same level of force, doing the same amount of work. In fact, it's been scientifically proven to not be the same thing. In a study done in 2001, researchers externally activated muscles like the tibialis anterior, which only has one origination point and one insertion point, and they measured the amount of force felt on either end. And what they discovered was that despite the whole muscle undergoing the same electrical activation, there were different levels of force felt on either end of the muscle. And it's that force, the amount of force that the muscle fibers are feeling, that matters when it comes to strengthening and growing muscles. I'm going to pop up a list here of the various factors that we know of that are at play when it comes to region-specific hypertrophy. And I'll also put the various studies that I referenced, links down in the video description in case you want to make a deeper dive. But I won't go deep into all of those various principles, just understand that all of those factors matter and make a difference when it comes to what specific region of the muscle that you're working is going to be the greatest as far as hypertrophy is going to be worked the most. And that is why I talk so much and so often about variety, the importance of variety in your workouts. You should be looking to hit each muscle in as many different ways, planes, angles, manipulating the 90-degree rule to make sure you're getting max resistance at different levels in the tension curves and in different places of the contraction of the muscle. All of those things do actually make a difference. It's also why I have little patience when people tell me that, oh, all you need is progressive overloading. Progressive overloading equals hypertrophy. That's it. Those are the two buzzwords these days. Well, if you just pick your core exercises and you just progressively overload over and over again in those exercises, doing them the same way, then you will get stronger and you will get bigger. But the people who just do that usually are big but don't look good, right? They look bulky because they've just been working these same parts of the same muscles over and over again, rather than working a holistic and working all the various parts of a muscle. And two, it's just not healthy, right? Not all hypertrophy is created equal. If all you do is just load the same muscles the same ways over and over again, then the tendons and ligaments that you are loading on, I mean, it's just a matter of time until you start getting overtraining injuries. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse, and to finish here, I'm going to go over why the exercise that I gave you at the beginning of this video is an excellent one for targeting and growing the inner chest. As an overly simplistic but easy to remember rule, if your arm is extended, fully abducted out away from your body, and you're pressing out, you're going to be working mostly the outer fibers of the pec muscles. If your arm is close into your body and you're pressing in, then you're going to be working mostly the inner fibers. And you can prove this to yourself anecdotally. If you just, whatever you're doing right now, if you extend your arm out and then you go back and forth pressing out and then feel your chest, you can feel that the outer fibers of pec major, they are extending and contracting a lot, right? They're putting much of the force into that movement. Whereas if you feel the inner chest, they're doing almost nothing. I mean, they're just completely stretched out already, right? When you're extended, those inner fibers are stretched. And it's similar to the concept called active insufficiency, where muscles are so stretched, they're so extended that they're unable to exert a significant amount of force. This isn't that principle, but it's similar train of thought, an easier way to think of it. And then on the flip side, when your arm is close in to your body, then you feel, your chest and the outer muscles, they're all bunched up already, right? They're already contracted. Whereas if you feel the inner fibers of your chest and then press in, you will feel how much more those inner fibers are contracting. And some may say, well, you're just pushing the pec muscle over with your arm. Even if you extend your arm out in front of yourself so that you're not physically pushing the chest in, and then adduct your arm, bring it in, you will feel how much those inner fibers are working. And in actuality, the best way to target or isolate the inner fibers as much as possible is to actually go past midline, but that's only possible in unilateral exercises, and I will show you how to implement that in a separate future video. So this time it's a similar concept to passive insufficiency with these outer fibers, where they are so contracted already that they're not going to be able to contribute any significant additional force with further contraction, with further motion that requires the pec muscles. So it's that adduction movement or pressing in of the arm that really favors the inner chest fibers, but only when your arm is already close in to your body. If you, for example, start your flies with your arm all the way out and back behind yourself, like most people do, then it's going to be the outer chest fibers that are taking charge out there until you get to a point where your arm is closer in to midline. Some of you have probably heard that a wide grip bench press will work the outer chest and a narrow grip will work the inner chest. Well, it's half true. A wide grip press will preferentially work the outer chest, but the narrow grip, it's more accurate to say that it's working the whole chest equally. In order to really preferentially target the inner fibers, there has to be an adduction aspect to that motion. So now you can understand that this exercise that I developed goes over, or it implements all of these various aspects of working the inner chest that we've discussed. by taking a step back and squeezing those cables together, you're making sure that the cables are at 90 degrees to your arms. That way, there's maximum resistance pushing against that internal adduction motion. If you were out in front of the machine, then the angle of resistance would not be at 90 degrees to the motion. And so taking that step back, that really puts maximum resistance against adduction, which is really what targets those inner fibers of the chest. And as I mentioned to note at the beginning of the video, I don't extend my arms all the way out, right? Because then we're bringing in those outer pec fibers, and of course they're always going to be activated and you're always going to be working them somewhat, right? But they are going to be taking more of the force away from the inner chest when you extend your arms all the way out, and we want to maintain as much tension as possible on the inner fibers. So you don't go all the way out before bringing that squeeze back in. And then there's the press out. And the press out does a couple really valuable things for us. The first is that it changes the angle of resistance that the inner pec muscles are feeling. Right? The easiest way to think about it is just keep your eye on the angle of that cable. Right? It's changing, and one of the principles that is at play here is the pennation angle, which was on that list that I showed you earlier. I won't go into the details there, but just you should know enough by now to know that changing the angle of resistance that those inner fibers feel is extremely beneficial. We're making sure that we're working the full range of the inner fibers' capabilities. And even though the motion is pressing out, because that cable is pulling from the side, there's still a component of resistance to adduction. Right? You still have to be squeezing in throughout that whole motion. Then the second big value add that press out motion adds to this exercise is that it increases the effective resistance that the chest muscles feel, or it increases the effective weight of the exercise. And this is due to something that I call the lever and fulcrum principle, which I went into detail in another video that I will link here and put a link to in the video description. But basically, the farther away from your body that your arms get, the heavier that weight will appear to your muscles, and the heavier and the harder it will be for them to maintain that adduction. But because of that, you will reach failure with the presses before you will with the squeezes. So when you reach the point that you can't do any more of those press outs, then rep out several more of those squeezes until you hit failure again. That's why I add those onto the end of every set. So now the next time that you hear somebody tell you that you can't work your inner chest or any other type of region-specific hypertrophy, you can just send them this video. And if you want to get serious about really filling out every region of your chest and want to make sure that your workouts are taking advantage of the very best of exercise science to make sure that you are as efficiently and effectively as possible building your chest while simultaneously making sure you're implementing proper technique and procedures to avoid injury, then the good news is that I am currently in the process of developing my Maximum Gains 8-week chest program, where everything down to the number of sets, reps, supersets, the optimal recovery times, and everything is based on the latest in exercise science and optimized to fill out every section of the chest with particular emphasis on those areas that are typically difficult for people to grow and hit. And you can now add your name to the beta tester waitlist for that program. Everyone who registers as a beta tester before the program launches will get 50% off the program, and they will be able to try it out several weeks before I release it to the general public. I'll leave the link to add your name to that list in the video description below, and you can also find it on my website at dr-gains.com. And guys, if you thought this video was helpful, I'd really appreciate you hitting that like button and leaving me a comment so that others can find my channel. And if you haven't, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on those post notifications so that you don't miss any of my future content, because I'm just getting started. Mahalo, my friends. Until next time.